Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
However, if one were to treat a vampire as a warrior and an assassin, they would soon face their doom. Vampires had the speed of assassins and the power of warriors. At the same time, they were also extremely proficient in some dark magic. Hence, despite being on the same level, vampires were still terrifying opponents of humans. The black clouds which were formed by the black bats soon flew above the expedition, after which the black bats turned into humanoid form, screaming as they pounced onto the members of the expedition like bolts of black lightning. The skeletal warriors were only surrounding the expedition in a single ring. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom, the holy light knights of the Brilliant Shrine, and the death knights of the Tower of Dusk were blocking and resisting them. No matter how strong and powerful the modified skeletal warriors were, they would not be able to break through the defense of the expedition. However, vampires were different. They flew directly above the expedition and plunged straight into the inner circle of the group. The center of the team was full of people from professions like priests and mages. If the vampires rushed in, the expedition would probably be in serious trouble. At the sight of this, Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the others began to panic. There were tens of thousands of vampires, and they were falling down like rain. Even though they were legendary powerhouses, who were at the pinnacle of the realm, they could not quite block the vampires and keep them away. President Flick, hurry and use that magical weapon of yours. You can't let those vampires rush in. Donald was a little anxious, and he remembered the magical weapon that Lin Li had used back then to instantaneously kill a high elf at the peak of the legendary level. However, he did not want to probe Lin Li this time. Instead, he really hoped that Lin Li could use that magical weapon to resolve the crisis before them. Ray at updated street rise at N. Vel, Bin, Calm. However, Lin Li did not take out that mysterious and powerful magical weapon again as Donald had hoped. Without even looking at the sky, he instead calmly said, Ufalusi, Norfaler, handle these vampires. Donald panicked when he heard Lin Li's words. There were tens of thousands of vampires above them, even if they were not high-level ones. The vast number was no longer something that could be stopped by one or two powerhouses. If Ufalusi and Norfaler were sanctuary powerhouses, Donald naturally would not be worried. However, the problem was that they were only powerhouses at the peak of level 24. Besides, the undead creatures in this world were rather peculiar, and God knew what kind of special abilities those vampires had. Donald was a legendary mage himself. He knew that even if there were 10 of himself, he would not even be able to block the vampires seamlessly. There were tens of thousands of vampires, not skeletal warriors. Even if the latter became extremely flexible, they would be about the same as ordinary people. A large magic spell would be able to destroy a large number of them. However, the vampires were as quick as lightning, and a single magic spell that a mage like him cast would be the same as throwing a stone into a pile of flies. The flies would merely disperse, and only a few would be killed. Donald felt that there were two possible reasons that Lin Li refused to use the magical weapon. One would be that it really could not be used for the time being, and the other was that Lin Li wanted to keep it as his trump card, and could not bear to use it now. Of the two possibilities, Donald undoubtedly believed the second one more. Hence, when he saw that Lin Li was not sparing a thought for everyone and looking at the bigger picture, he immediately anxiously said, President Flick, we're already at this juncture, yet you're still. However, a bloody rain suddenly began to fall from the sky before Donald could finish speaking, followed by countless corpses. The people from the Tower of Dusk were long prepared, and thus did not get stained by the blood at all. Meanwhile, the people from the Brilliant Shrine were shrouded in the light of purification, which purified all the blood and corpses that touched them, turning them into ashes. Only most of the members of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team were caught off guard and drenched in that rain of blood, while broken pieces of flesh hung from their bodies. Donald was having it better. After all, he was a mage at the peak of the legendary realm. He gave himself a layer of magic shield to protect himself in time, shielding himself from the rain of blood and corpses falling from the sky. Afterward, he had no mind to pay to Lin Li. He looked up at the sky, only to get a great shock which caused his eyes to widen and his jaws to drop. In the sky, he saw that Norfaler was wielding a pair of daggers which emitted two rays of red light that were nearly 2 meters long as he moved at high speed. It looked like the sword Sage's Storm. However, it was clearly several times larger in scale. It almost covered the sky above the expedition. Tens of thousands of vampires were falling from the sky like a black funnel. However, Norfaler's bloody storm seemed to have become a meat grinder that blocked the bottom of the funnel, leaving the vampires that were rushing downwards with no chance to exhibit their special abilities bestowed by the immortal king at all. As soon as the vampires touched the lights, they were instantly ground into pieces. None of them could dash through the bloody storm. Ufolusi, who was riding the humorous Wyrm and flying together with Norfaller, actually seemed to have nothing to do at the beginning. Of course, there were too many vampires, and despite having peak legendary level strength, Norfaller could not continue killing them. However, by the time Norfaller's blood storm was about to stop, Ufolusi pointed his skeleton staff towards the sky. Thick, corrosive and gloomy clouds immediately replaced the blood storm and covered the sky above the expedition. When the effects of the corrosive clouds weakened, Norfaller wielded his daggers again to create a bloody storm. Lin Li's undead servants took turns to attack, thus shielding the sky above. In fact, they even seemed rather relaxed. Oh god, that's too terrifying. Looking at the bloody massacre in the sky, Donald and the others could not help but feel a chill down their spines. Although powerhouses at the peak of the legendary level could also cast powerful attacks like the bloody storm and the corrosive cloud, it would be painstaking to cast them continuously. In fact, although it was true that Ufolusi and Norfaller were much stronger than ordinary legendary powerhouses at the pinnacle of the realm, the reason they could do that was undeniably also because of the environment there. Both of them were undead creatures, and their power sources were the power of death and soul fire, which were precisely what this world lacked the least. Norfaller and Ufolusi would indeed consume a rather huge amount of their own power by casting the bloody storm and the corrosive cloud, but they could obtain plenty of soul fire to replenish the energy that they had lost at the same time that they were killing the undead creatures. They could also obtain a large surplus of soul fire and enjoy the replenishment of power of death that was everywhere in this world. Although the consumption was not negligible, it was still within an acceptable range for them. Don't stop, keep going, Lin Li said in a tone that was as calm as ever. He seemed to be unaffected by the bloody massacre in the sky. Faced with such a situation, everyone was speechless. The expedition continued to slowly advance towards their target despite the immense pressure. Norfaller and Ufolusi were flying in the sky above the expedition and adjusting their positions while moving together with the team. Of course, not all of the vampires were bent on breaking through their defense from Norfaller and Ufolusi's side. There were also plenty of them who were avoiding the two of them, landing on the periphery of the expedition and mixing in with the skeletal warriors. However, the damage they could do to the expedition was far inferior to what landing in the middle of the team would accomplish. Even though the vampires were much stronger than the skeletal warriors, there were far too many of them, and it was similarly almost impossible for them to break in through the periphery. The only thing that made the members of the expedition rather uncomfortable was the continuous blood rain and the broken bits of corpses that would hit their bodies every now and then. Although they had all been through harsh training and were no strangers to bloodbaths, they were still uncomfortable. Accompanied by the bloodbath, the expedition advanced towards their goal again. However, the area that was covered by the shadows in the distance seemed to be extremely distant. Despite Norfaller's and Ufolusi's massacre, the vampires did not decrease in number, and the clouds made up of vampires could still be seen swarming in from the periphery. So far, the expedition might be in a tough and dangerous predicament, where they were advancing slowly, but it seemed that as long as they advanced continuously, it would only be a matter of time before they reached the destination. However, the optimism in the hearts of the members of the expedition vanished like a bubble soon after it arose because of the appearance of a strange group of undead creatures. The new undead creatures were very tall, almost on par with the alchemy colossuses. They walked upright, with dagger-like fangs in their mouths, a pair of curved, pointed horns on their foreheads, a pair of bony wings on their backs, and a stubby tail that was wagging incessantly. These are the skeletons of greater demons from the endless abyss. How did they end up here? Archbishop Martin immediately shrieked in disbelief after seeing the bunch of tall and large skeletons. Greater demon was not a universal term for abyssal demons, but rather a specific race of abyssal demons. Although they mainly lived in the deepest part of the abyss, they often appeared in the top few floors too. Besides, they often appeared as demon lords that ruled all abyssal demons of the same floor. In the legends of Anril, there were often stories of demons tempting humans to sell their souls, and those things were actually the doings of the greater demons. Hence, ever since the Brilliant Shrine was established, they had dealt with greater demons several times before. Most of the purification tasks completed by the Court of Heresy had to do with greater demons. The reason that Archbishop Martin was actually surprised was not just because of the appearance of the greater demon skeletons, as the skeleton of any other abyssal demon would be unimaginable. It was because the souls of the abyssal demons all belonged to the endless abyss and the ancient demon deities that had created the endless abyss. There was no necromancer in history who could turn abyssal demons into undead creatures, as that would be tantamount to challenging the might and authority of the ancient demon deities. Archbishop Martin was not the only one who knew about that. In fact, almost everyone in the expedition did. The ancient demon deities were evil existences that could rival gods and myths. Based on the endless abyss that they had created, one could see how terrifying the power they possessed was. Fighting even an abyssal demon that was of the lowest level would be akin to fighting against the entire endless abyss, a price that no necromancer could afford. However, Lin Li knew that even Osric, who was a disciple of the immortal king, had been able to delve deep into the endless abyss to kill Balak, the most powerful tyrant of the ancient demon deities. With the immortal king's powerful abilities, he even killed the dragon of destruction, and dared to blaspheme even the true gods. How could he take the ancient demon deities seriously? No matter where those undead greater demon came from, they had to face them since they were enemies. The undead greater demons were about level 17 and level 18, and a few of them had reached the legendary level. Among the undead creatures, they should be considered undead lords. Fortunately, this batch was small in number. There were probably only about a few hundred of them. Hence, they would not pose too much of a threat to the expedition yet. However, although the size of this batch wasn't large, a few more groups of undead greater demons could be seen in the distance. They were moving quickly towards the team. If the expedition were to be surrounded by the undead greater demons, it would be difficult to continue advancing, though they would not be destroyed. However, once the expedition stopped moving, they would eventually be overwhelmed by the undead creatures. There was no other possible outcome. President Flick, Master Flick, Donald and Archbishop Martin unanimously pinned their hopes on Lin Li again. It had already become a habit for them. If not for the Tower of Dusk's team, the expedition made up of the two forces teams would not even have been able to pass the obstacle of the undead elemental dragon. If they had been lucky, perhaps they would have been able to escape as ashes. If they had been out of luck, let alone making it this far, they would have been annihilated completely. However, even at such a moment, Lin Li still did not take out the magical weapon that he had once used to kill the high elf at the peak of the legendary level like Donald had hoped. That made Donald suspect whether that magical weapon could be used again. After all, the previous battle between Lin Li and Osric happened rather far from the ground above Alana City. Donald could not figure out how exactly Lin Li had killed Osric, and how many times Lin Li had used Thunderbolt during the battle. In his opinion, if Lin Li could still use that magical weapon, he would have used it without hesitation given the situation that they were in now. Otherwise, he might not even have the chance to use it later. At this moment, Lin Li did not take out Thunderbolt. Instead, he used another piece of the debris of the stars, Gloomy Dark. There were two black balls around Gloomy Dark, revolving around it like they were satellites. At Lin Li's current level, legendary powerhouses were all like insignificant ants to him. His so-called trump card was not reserved for them, either. He did not use Thunderbolt and ignored the covetousness of Donald and the others simply because it was inappropriate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used Thunderbolt without any restraint when he had killed the High Elf at the peak of the legendary realm back then. This time, Lin Li took out Gloomy Dark, but he also used his mental strength to suppress the mana waves of the Gloomy Dark out of consideration for the undead creatures. Otherwise, all of the undead creatures in this world would instantly go berserk because of the power of Gloomy Dark as soon as it appeared. The two small black balls revolving around Gloomy Dark were left behind after Lin Li killed the twin Dracoliches in the Green Dragon Graveyard, back in the Ga mountain range. All along, Lin Li had been unclear on the relationship between Gloomy Dark and the two black balls. He did not know how to make use of them, either. However, after stepping into the Sanctuary Realm, Lin Li could be considered to have made a qualitative leap in his mastery of the debris of the stars. Although the leap would not allow Lin Li to completely exert the full power of the debris of the stars, he had gained a considerable understanding of the nature of their power. Under Lin Li's mental strength stimulation, the two black balls that were revolving around Gloomy Dark suddenly sped up. After reaching an extreme velocity, they flew out one after another. Next, everyone heard the dull sound of two explosions, and a large wave of black mist erupted. Two identical Dracoliches appeared in the sky above the team. Compared to when they were in the Green Dragon Graveyard, the two Dracoliches had already become much stronger. They had reached the peak of level 23, and were only one step away from level 24. However, in reality, Lin Li knew that the two Dracoliches were already powerless. Their power was given by Gloomy Dark. To be more precise, they were like weapons that contained the power of Gloomy Dark. Although Lin Li was not certain if existences like Gloomy Dark were sentient, the two Dracoliches were undoubtedly manipulated by Gloomy Dark. If Gloomy Dark was Lin Li's magical weapon, the two Dracoliches could be considered the tools of Gloomy Dark. To a certain extent, they were incarnations. Seeing that Lin Li did not take out the mysterious and powerful magical weapon like he had expected, and instead took out another item while summoning two Dracoliches, one with powerful magical waves, Donald felt like he was about to lose his mind. Deep down in his mind, he was already roaring. Just how many more trump cards does this president of a nameless force have? Although Donald couldn't recognize the mysterious existences the Dracoliches were. He could clearly sense the massive level 23 mana waves from the two Dracoliches. Even in a force like the Rotterdam Kingdoms, level 23 power was definitely in the top tier. In fact, even powerhouses who had just stepped into the legendary realm would be won over by the royal family in every possible way. What more level 23 legendary powerhouses? They would receive any noble title and any amount of wealth they wanted. Actually, the Rotterdam Kingdom was not the only one. Any other force would probably do the same. Besides, even if they were to come up with ways to tie down the mages, they might not be able to make every legendary powerhouse feel tempted, let alone the ultimate level 23 powerhouses who were about to reach the peak of the legendary realm. As for cultivating their own mages, they would have to pay an even greater price. Even if they spent a massive amount of resources, they might not get to nurture a legendary powerhouse. That was precisely the reason that the Rotterdam Kingdom decided to spend more energy on the alchemy colossuses, which would at least be better than nurturing a person who might not even reach the legendary realm in the end. That was also one of the reasons that the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom believed that alchemy would inevitably eventually replace combat professions such as mages and warriors. However, two possessors of such a massive combat power that was highly coveted by all forces were actually summoned by an unassuming magic prop. Looking at the two level 23 Dracoliches who were surrounded by black mist in the air, Donald and the others were almost vomiting blood out of jealousy. Damn it, where did this kid come from? He's actually so powerful. Why haven't I heard of the Tower of Dusk before? Of course, Lin Li was not concerned about the thoughts of others at all. After summoning the twin Dracoliches, he immediately gave them orders through gloomy dark. Next, the two Dracoliches that were shrouded in black mist were seen rushing out of the group without making a single sound. They then charged towards the undead greater demons that were approaching the expedition. One of the Dracoliches stretched its arm out, and a poison domain was suddenly exhibited, shrouding everything including the undead greater demons in a layer of green. Although the undead creatures had extremely high resistance to poison, the power that the Dracoliches now had belonged to the debris of the stars, gloomy dark. The poison was no longer a simple toxin, but a type of law. After being engulfed in the poison domain, the movements of the undead creatures immediately became significantly slower and stiffer. Even their soul fire seemed to be eroded by the poison. However, at the end of the day, the undead greater demons were much stronger than the skeletal warriors. Even though their bodies and soul fire were stained by the poison, they didn't seem to be affected very much. They wielded tridents and were striding towards the expedition. It seemed that they would not stop until they stabbed a few people with their tridents. However, immediately afterward, the other Dracolic attacked too. Similarly, it displayed its magical domain, the death domain, that emitted the aura of silence and immediately fused with the poison domain. That was the characteristic of the twin Dracoliches. Due to their relationship, their magical domains could be fused together. The laws of death and poison complemented each other, and there would be no conflict at all. With such characteristics, the twin Dracoliches would probably be able to rival the sanctuary powerhouses if they could advance to the peak of the legendary realm. With the appearance of the death domain, the soul fire in the eye sockets of the undead greater demons immediately trembled vigorously. The ones that were less powerful even flew out directly and merged into the magical domains of the twin Dracoliches. All of a sudden, everyone could clearly see large light green sparks flying out of the undead creatures' bodies shrouded in the magical domain, before gradually disappearing in the air. With the disappearance of each spark, an undead creature on the ground would crumble, as if its skeleton had suddenly lost the force that bound it together. The people from both the Rotterdam Kingdom and the Brilliant Shrine were dumbfounded to see such a spectacular scene. Actually, they ought not to be blamed for having such a reaction. They did not know that the power of the two Dracoliches actually came from the debris of the stars, gloomy dark, which contained pure laws of darkness. In less than a moment's time, hundreds of undead greater demons were silently wiped out by the two Dracoliches together with the skeletal warriors that were blocking the expedition. The expedition's members only came back to their senses and immediately sped up in advancing towards their target when they heard Lin Li urging. However, the two Dracoliches did not lead the way in front of the expedition. Instead, they immediately leapt towards the other undead greater demons after destroying the first batch. Under the full swing attacks of the two Dracoliches, the undead greater demons actually did not reach the expedition. Ufalusi and Norfaler were guarding them from above, while the two Dracoliches were constantly blocking the undead greater demons. The expedition would not be in a predicament for a while. However, after feeling surprised, the members of the expedition did not feel relaxed, because they knew that the truly powerful undead creatures had not appeared yet. Although no one knew if the Immortal King had researched and created some strange and weird undead creatures in this world, they knew, according to common sense, that terrifying existences like the humorous Wyrm were at the top of the hierarchy of undead creatures. Humorous Wyrms were not necessarily all skeletons of Wyrms, but as long as they were humorous Wyrms, their strength would at least be at the legendary level. With the scale of undead creatures in this world, one would not even be able to imagine how many humorous Wyrms would appear. However, one thing for sure was that the Immortal King definitely would not be satisfied with just creating some low-level undead creatures. However, they did not have a backup plan. They could either stop and wait to die, or go all out and fight. Everyone in the expedition now knew that the further they delved, the more dangerous their situation would become. However, they also knew that they had no other choice but to keep advancing. Stopping would only allow them to survive for a while. If one decided to go all out, they would often be able to explode with greater strength. The expedition no longer considered retreating. All they could think about was advancing towards their goal. There was instantly a huge increase in their speed. Of course, the increase in speed was only relative to before, and their speed was at most similar to that of ordinary people walking. After all, the resistance that the countless undead creatures brought to the expedition would not vanish because of their emotions. It wasn't that the expedition had never tried killing all the undead creatures in front of them with all their might in order to achieve the goal of increasing the team's advance speed. Even the magic spells that the mages of the Tower of Dusk had used to kill the undead creatures in front of them were only as effective as using a knife to split water. Although they could kill many undead creatures at once, the gap was filled with undead creatures, again at the next moment before they could even take a few steps forward. With the sunrise and sunset of this world, the expedition fought continuously against the tide of undead creatures for 2 days and 2 nights without stopping. Finally, the sky that was being shrouded by shadows in the distance seemed to be getting increasingly large in front of them. However, they still could not tell what existences those shadows were with their eyesight. The members of the expedition had also thought of using the warlock's eyes to check out the situation over there in advance, but there were too many undead creatures that were casting spells. The warlock's eyes would be consumed by the magic spells before it could even go far. However, no matter what, the expedition was still advancing. As long as they did not stop, they would finally reach their destination at some point. However, the expedition had paid a huge price to make it that far. The Rotterdam Kingdom had already completely abandoned 4 alchemy colossuses. Although they had enough magical crystals, the long duration of operation of the alchemy colossuses had resulted in major great wear and tear on the various components of the alchemy colossuses. Besides, the skeletal warriors did not quite pose no threat to the alchemy colossuses. Water drops could drip through stone slabs through accumulation. Although the attacking power of the skeletal warriors was low compared to the defense of the alchemy colossuses, the endless attacks of the skeletal warriors would cause even the strongest defense to eventually collapse. As for the team of the Brilliant Shrine, the Holy Light Knights were in charge of guarding the 2 sides of the team, but the pressure they endured was actually not less than those fighting at the front. If they were facing ordinary undead creatures, perhaps the Holy Light Knights would have a much easier time, but all the undead creatures in this world seemed to have no fear of the power of light. A large number of ants would be able to bite an elephant to death. Besides, the undead creatures there were not ants, and the Holy Light Knights were not elephants. After 2 days and 2 nights of battle, the Holy Light Knights had already suffered 7 casualties, and the number of severely wounded knights had reached double digits. Fortunately, they had the support of the priests who were constantly empowering and healing them with holy light magic. Otherwise, the number of casualties would have been twice as big. The mages were right in the middle of the team of the Tower of Dusk, and the undead creatures would not be able to reach them without breaking through the outer layer of defense. Because of that, there still had not been any casualties among them even till now. Although Donald, Archbishop Martin, and the others were jealous of that, there was nothing they could say. They could not make their mages fight the undead creatures in melee. Besides, the mages of the Tower of Dusk had not been slacking at all. They were suffering the attacks launched by the enemies while continuously bombarding the surrounding undead creatures with powerful magic spells. In terms of battle results, the mages of the Tower of Dusk definitely killed many more undead creatures than the teams from the Rotterdam Kingdom and the Brilliant Shrine combined. 1. The Raw said, "Dark mages," and it appeared later. I assume it's a mistake, but I leave a note for y'all in case Donald thinks they are dark mages, and that's what the author was getting at. Besides, in the sky, Ufalusi and Norfaler were blocking the attacks from the vampires for the expedition. The 2 Dracoliches were also going around the team and blocking the undead greater demons for everyone. Besides, they were also killing numerous undead creatures. Under such circumstances, even the proud people of the Rotterdam Kingdom could not blame the people of the Tower of Dusk. After all, they did not sustain any injuries because they were capable. If they were to hold it against the Tower of Dusk, they would just be embarrassing themselves. However, no one would not be upset or anxious while watching more and more of their underlings die or get injured. After some hesitation, Donald nonetheless looked for Archbishop Martin and walked to Lin Li with him. Master Flick, you've seen it too. So far, our teams have suffered quite a few casualties, and if we continue like this, I'm afraid that we won't be able to go any further once we reach the destination that you've mentioned. Do you have any solution to help us advance more quickly? This time, Donald spoke to Lin Li rather politely, and even addressed him respectfully, which was different from his attitude in the past. Clearly, he dared not treat the Tower of Dusk like a small, unknown force anymore. Which small force would own an artifact that had the ability to instantly kill a powerhouse at the peak of the legendary realm? Which small force would be able to summon 2 level 23 dark mages, at once? Donald even wondered if the Tower of Dusk was just an alias of the Supreme Council, or a direct subordinate force of the Supreme Council. They first used a magical weapon that could kill a legendary powerhouse immediately before taking out a magic prop that could summon 2 dark mages. That made Donald almost certain that the Tower of Dusk probably still had some trump cards that they had yet to reveal. He could not influence Lin Li with his status. Hence, he pulled Archbishop Martin along in the hopes of persuading the Tower of Dusk to take out more of their trump cards. Lin Li did agree to their requests the first 2 times. He first sent Norfaler and Ufalusi to defend against the hordes of vampires, after which he summoned the twin Dracoliches to kill the undead greater demons. However, after hearing Donald's words this time, Lin Li did not take out anything. He simply looked at Donald indifferently and said, "Master Donald, please note that we are partners, and I am not your babysitter. If you don't prove that you are of some value, is there any need for this partnership to continue existing?" No matter what, the Rotterdam Kingdom had heritage reaching the Dark Age, and they had barely suffered from any wars in the Dark Age. It was impossible for them not to have any foundation. Lin Li did not believe that Donald and the others would dare to explore the Immortal King's Sky Castle with their alchemy colossuses, which had not even reached the legendary level. Although Lin Li did not have to care about what strong trump cards the Rotterdam Kingdom might have with his current strength, there was no need for him to be their babysitter. Even if they were just going to be cannon fodder, they still had to show some value. If the Rotterdam Kingdom did not show any value at all, there would be no need for Lin Li to waste his effort and take them to Osric's place. Hearing Lin Li's words, the expression on Donald's face stiffened, and he did not know how to reply at all. It was impossible for them to go explore in the Immortal King's Sky Castle without anything to rely on. However, if he revealed their trump cards, they would no longer be trump cards. After all, 3 forces were currently working together, and the enemy was not the only thing they had to worry about. In the history of Anril, there had been many who lost both their manpower and wealth while exploring ruins and searching for treasures, all because they lacked trump cards. If the Rotterdam Kingdom was the only force on this expedition, Donald naturally would have no qualms about it. He would definitely use whatever means he had. However, be it the Tower of Dusk or the Brilliant Shrine, they did not have any strong ties with the Rotterdam Kingdom at all. Hence, they definitely would not feel any guilt for ripping the other force off at all. Actually, there had been quite a few instances in history where siblings turned against each other because of treasures, let alone different forces in a cooperation. One could only trust oneself. In this situation, Donald would have lived in vain if he had not had any reservations. However, Lin Li had already made his words clear, and if Donald did not take out something of value, it would be tantamount to admitting that the Rotterdam Kingdom was too incompetent. Additionally, it was likely that the cooperation would really be suspended. With their understanding of the previous battles, Donald had to admit that without his own team, the teams of the Tower of Dusk and the Brilliant Shrine might be able to withstand the attack of the undead creatures. However, if he were to leave the 2 teams, it would be difficult for his faction to persist even if they took out all their trump cards. At the thought of this, Donald had no choice but to smile awkwardly. He said, "We've indeed prepared some things that we're planning to use at the crucial juncture. Since you need it now, President Flick, we have no choice but to take it out in advance." Upon hearing this, Archbishop Martin couldn't help but purse his lips silently and think to himself, the people from Rotterdam Kingdom are really good at preserving their pride. They're making it sound like they're stepping in because others cannot. However, Lin Li did not hold having those thoughts against Donald. As long as they could show some value, they could say whatever they wanted. Not only did Donald fail to make Lin Li take out more trump cards, he was even forced to show his own. Although that had allowed Donald to regain some of his pride, he still felt rather uncomfortable. However, now that things had developed to this point, he might really be abandoned if he did not take out something valuable. Soon, Donald arrived in front of the team with 10 archmages who had yet to attack before. Afterward, under Donald's request, the team temporarily stopped in their tracks. The 10 archmages began reciting a summoning incantation while taking advantage of the time. Afterward, an alchemy array used to open their alchemy space appeared in front of each of the 10 archmages. As the golden rays of light shone from the alchemy arrays, burly figures gradually appeared in the alchemy array. Those items seemed to be alchemy colossuses, but not the humanoid ones. Those alchemy colossuses each had 4 legs on the ground and an egg-shaped body. They looked somewhat like giant steel spiders. After summoning the strange alchemy colossuses, the 10 archmages immediately used the levitation spell to fly up, and each quickly entered the egg-shaped body of their alchemy colossus. Seeing this, the rest except the team of the Rotterdam Kingdom could not help but be curious. The alchemy colossuses that had been summoned seemed to have barely any offensive power. How did they become the secret weapons of the Rotterdam Kingdom? However, just as everyone was confused, the egg-shaped bodies of the alchemy colossuses made some noises, and both sides in front slowly split open, after which a cannon barrel that had the diameter of a bucket stuck out from inside. Seeing this, the crowd finally understood that it was simply a mobile magical crystal cannon. Actually, it did make sense. Given the relationship between the Rotterdam Kingdom and the Dwarf Kingdom, it would not be too difficult for them to get some magical crystal cannons. Besides, the power of these magical crystal cannons was undoubtedly massive. The only problem was that the magical crystal cannons were not too mobile. They could usually only be fixed to the walls to defend a city. However, the Rotterdam Kingdom was good at alchemy, and using the technology of the alchemy colossus to build a mobile turret platform for the magical crystal cannons would definitely be easy. The portable magical crystal cannon might seem rather simple, but the power of the magical crystal cannons was so massive that it was considered a siege engine type artifact. However, what really caused the magical crystal cannon to be less popular than it should be was not its cost, but its consumption of magical crystals. Each blast of the cannon would cost a bomb, which was not affordable for every force. It was no wonder that the Rotterdam Kingdom's team chose not to use them previously despite being in crisis. The appearance of 10 mobile magic crystal cannons had indeed shocked many people, but Lin Li only took a glance at them and soon lost interest. They were just magical crystal cannons to him. The Tower of Dusk had already had more than 100 of them installed on the tower, and there were also more than 10 magical crystal cannons that were powered by legendary magical crystals in the Ring of Endless Storm. Of course, the 4-legged movement mode was also a highlight as it was at least much more adaptable than wheeled alchemy colossuses. However, that highlight was not attractive to Lin Li at all. He could even get Angelano to build a mobile magical crystal cannon that could fly in the sky if he wanted to, but was that necessary? However, the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom treated Lin Li's indifference as pretentiousness. After summoning the mobile magical crystal cannons, Donald puffed his chest up and raised his chin, regaining his proud and arrogant appearance. He pointed his magic staff forward, and 10 mobile magical crystal cannons moved forward towards the alchemy colossuses that were in front. They then extended the barrels of the magical crystal cannons out through the gaps. Fire! Donald ordered with gusto. The 10 mobile magical crystal cannons had all 4 legs firmly placed on the ground. The barrels that had been extended outwards began exuding bright magical light. Next, 10 thick magical crystal cannon shots darted out, and all the undead creatures that had been blocked by the light were reduced to ashes in an instant. This time, the undead creatures in front of the expedition were destroyed in the blink of an eye. It was impossible to calculate how many undead creatures had vanished in the light. Taking this opportunity, the expedition immediately strode forward, and only stopped again when the undead creatures filled up the empty area again. President Flick, what do you think of our new alchemy colossuses? Donald asked Lin Li, trying to show off. At this moment, he wanted to prod him into taking out his trump cards. However, Lin Li's expression did not change despite Donald's bragging. He said, "Continue." Upon hearing his words, Donald almost spat blood in displeasure. Clearly, Lin Li was not going to reveal any more trump cards. Instead, he was going to open up the path with the magical crystal cannons. However, as soon as a magical crystal cannon was fired, a level 10 magical crystal would be gone. The level 15 magical crystals would not be enough to sustain a few shots, either. God knew how many times the cannons would have to be fired along the way. Even if legendary magical crystals were used as the power source, it would not be sustainable. Although the Rotterdam Kingdom's team had also gained plenty of magical crystals in the previous exploration, the magical crystal cannons and the alchemy colossuses required a lot of magical crystals. That was the same as making the Rotterdam Kingdom's team lose everything that they had just gained. However, he was just showing off, yet he had to go back on his word now. No matter how thick-skinned Donald was, he couldn't find a reason to decline, so he had no choice but to bite the bullet and accept it. Although the 10 mobile magical crystal cannons were not attractive to Lin Li at all, the power of the magical crystal cannons was known to all. As long as they were willing to spend some magical crystals, they would be able to exert wonderful effects. The 10 mobile magic crystal cannons continuously emitted light, clearing up a large patch of land in front of the expedition again and again. Hence, there was instantly a huge increase in the advancement speed of the team. They were getting closer and closer to the destination, and the shadow that was covering the sky was becoming increasingly clear to them. After advancing for another day and night, the expedition finally knew what that massive shadow was. No one could have imagined that the shadow that covered the sky from afar was actually an incomparably huge ancient tree. The sturdy trunk was like a mountain peak, and it was so large in diameter that one would probably take more than a few days and a few nights to run a lap around it. Besides, the canopy of the ancient tree was so large that they could not even see the sun rising and setting. If it was purely just a tree, it would not be enough to shock them. What really made the members of the expedition overwhelmed with disbelief was that the form of the giant tree was something that none of them had ever seen before. Although the tree had many branches and leaves, it did not give off any vitality. Every leaf on the crown of the tree had a grayish color that was emitting an intense death aura. The branches of the giant trees were also all covered with thick bone spikes that were constantly spewing black mist as if they were breathing out. Those who had good eyesight would be able to see numerous undead creatures falling down from the mist from time to time. Clearly, the undead creatures of this world came from the gigantic undead tree. It was an undead form of a giant tree that could constantly give rise to undead creatures. The members of the expedition could not believe their eyes at all. How did the tree turn into an undead creature? It could even breed undead creatures, completely defying the theories behind undead creatures that they knew. However, the members of the expedition did not have time to ponder that question carefully. As they got closer to the undead tree, countless figures suddenly flew out of the large crown canopy of the tree. When they got a clear glimpse of the appearance of the figures, they gasped and got goosebumps. All right. So it seems it's actually Donald thinking Dracoliches or dark mages. It turned out that what was charging towards the expedition ferociously was the humorous worms that they had been worried about previously. Besides, there were hundreds of humorous worms, which seemed rather dense and overwhelming. The massive mana waves seemed to have stuck together to become one. They were incomparably massive and intense. Upon sight of such a scene, even Lin Li couldn't help but be frightened. Compared to the humorous worms in front of them, the humorous worm legion in Prince Berhir's mausoleum was nothing. Although Lin Li, who was in the sanctuary realm, would not be afraid of the humorous worms, he could not help but worry about his own men. This test was obviously beyond what they could withstand. As for Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the others, they were shocked to the point of turning pale and widening their eyes in horror. In fact, even their lips were trembling slightly. So what if they were powerhouses at the peak of the legendary level? They would still be afraid of death. Who would be willing to die when life was precious, and they had made their lifelong achievements with great difficulty? Magical crystal cannons. Attack! Donald hollered hysterically, facing the humorous worms that were attacking them. He could no longer be bothered to consider issues like magnanimity and his pride. The 10 mobile magical crystal cannons shivered, and the muzzles were raised as rays of light quickly condensed and moved out of the muzzles. Next, 10 rays of light of mana that were as thick as buckets were shot at the humorous worms with roaring noise. However, the devastating effects of the magical crystal cannons were not seen on the bodies of the humorous worms. The rays of light bombarded the humorous worms and only caused them to pause for a while. Seeing such a scene, Donald's heart suddenly sank even lower. He knew his own items the best. The cannons of the mobile magical crystal cannons were specially manufactured by the Dwarf Kingdom on the request of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Their power was at least 5 times stronger than the normal magical crystal cannons. The power of an attack of a normal magical crystal cannon was equivalent to magic spells, about level 18 or level 19. However, the 10 magical crystal cannons could probably penetrate even a legendary mage's magical domain in one try. Of course, putting aside the relationships, custom ordering those 10 special magical crystal cannons was definitely expensive. The cost of each of them was definitely enough to be exchanged for dozens of ordinary magical crystal cannons. Besides, that was not because they had obtained it at a friendly price. It was precisely because the magical crystal cannons had such massive power that the Rotterdam Kingdom treated them as their trump cards, which they planned to use only at the crucial juncture of the expedition. The so-called trump cards were useful weapons that had to be used at the most critical moment to turn the situation around at once and turn defeat into victory. Although the rest did not understand how strong those mobile magical crystal cannons were, they could tell from the light from the cannons that they were definitely more powerful than ordinary ones. seeing that the terrifying cannons did not even cause the slightest damage to the humorous Wyrms. They immediately understood that what they were about to face would be the most difficult battle so far. Actually, the humorous Wyrms were only one aspect of it. There were still endless undead creatures around the expedition. The undead creatures would not let the expedition and the humorous Wyrms fight each other head-on. Besides, the humorous Wyrms had already appeared, hence, the liches that were also a top existence among the undead creatures, just like the humorous Wyrms would probably appear soon. Although the humorous Wyrms were just bones, they were not slower than actual Wyrms. In the blink of an eye, they flew out of the crown of the giant undead tree, approaching the expedition. As for the cannons launched by the Rotterdam Kingdom, they had no effect on the hundreds of humorous Wyrms at all. Besides, as the humorous Wyrms approached, the members of the expedition could soon see clearly that the humorous Wyrms were obviously different from what they had imagined. Just like what they had been worried about all along, the humorous Wyrms that they knew could be divided into two types. One was the type that could use dragon crystals as their core, and be assembled from the skeletons of other kinds of magical beasts and even humans. Another type was the ones that were a complete whole with the dragon crystal, and had become undead creatures. However, in reality, they were essentially not too different. They were combinations of dragon crystals and bones. The only difference was the type of skeleton used. For example, Ufalusa's crimson humorous Wyrm had long used the skeleton of a green dragon. Afterward, it switched to a stronger Wyrm skeleton in Prince Berhir's mausoleum. It was just like the difference in armor donned by humans. Some wore inferior armor, while some wore magical armor. Not all of the humorous Wyrms used the skeletons of Wyrms. Instead, they were made up of random bones. Actually, there was nothing strange about it, regardless of their image. However, the humorous Wyrms that the expedition was facing at the moment were obviously not pieced together with random bones, though their image was very different from what they remembered because their skeleton was covered in a layer of scaly skin. Those humorous Wyrms were like air-dried corpses that were just skin and bones. It even made them wonder if they had been starved to death. However, the layer of scaly skin on their bodies did not seem loose at all. Instead, it was tightly wrapped around the skeleton. It clearly provided them with great protection. Since they had a layer of skin, it was obviously unlikely that the skeletons inside were composed of random bones that were messily pieced together. Hence, it was likely that they were similar to what they looked like before they died. However, the humorous Wyrms, or rather corpse dragons, still looked significantly different from real dragons. For example, there were a few of them that were three-headed dragons, which were very likely to possess 3 dragon crystals. Hence, they were definitely much more powerful than average corpse dragons. Besides, they could tell from the natural alignment of the group of corpse dragons that the 3-headed corpse dragons clearly had higher status among them, as the other corpse dragons all maintained a certain distance from them. Most of the corpse dragons had extremely distinct abyssal demon features. However, they were definitely not abyssal demon dragons. Instead, the corpse dragons were a combination of a Wyrm and some powerful abyssal demon. The combination was not a bloodline fusion, but a physical combination, where the Wyrm and the abyssal demon were treated as machines. The various parts of their bodies were forcefully combined. Even if they were ordinary humorous Wyrms, they would still be able to make anyone feel hopeless because of how numerous they were. Not to mention, they were mutant humorous Wyrms that had been heavily modified beyond recognition. However, the group of corpse dragons did not give the expedition any time to be afraid at all. They rushed towards the team and released earth-shattering dragon breaths and magic spells. The corpse dragons should not have been conceived by the undead tree. It was most likely that they were all products of the experiments that the immortal king had conducted in the past. They had survived for thousands of years in this world of the undead, and each and every one of them was not simply a legendary level creature. There were many at the peak of the legendary level. The 3-headed corpse dragons in particular had strength that was at the peak of the legendary level. Besides, they were 3-in-1 entities that would probably have no problem contending with an average sanctuary powerhouse. The power of mana that they possessed was not limited to necromagic, as each of their heads possessed a certain type of mana alignment, or one of the 4 elemental magic. There could be necromagic too. One of the 3-headed corpse dragons even had a head that could actually cast the power of light, which was not inferior to Archbishop Martin of the expedition at all. Seeing the overwhelming magic spells and dragon breaths crashing down, the members of the expedition dared not slow down at all. One by one, they cast their strongest defensive methods. The Holy Light Knights formed a defensive battle formation. The battle song formed a barrier of light in the sky, emitting a holy aura that could not be penetrated by any evil at all. The priests chanted the Holy Light prayer in unison, and rays of pure and holy light emerged from their bodies, engulfing the sky above the expedition like smoke. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team also condensed numerous glistening hexagonal shields. As their alchemy arrays glowed brightly, the hexagonal light shields were tightly connected to each other like a beehive, forming a huge dome above the expedition. On the Tower of Dusk's side, the mages were also doing their best to operate the magic net array, quickly mounting layer after layer of elemental defense above the Tower of Dusk in the Rotterdam Kingdom. Each layer was as strong as those cast by powerhouses at the peak of the legendary level. At one point, the sky above the expedition was filled with all sorts of colorful and brilliant defensive power, making it a little difficult for the people below to see what was happening outside. However, was that defense enough? That was the question in the mind of everyone. The corpse dragons were far too terrifyingly powerful, and no matter how many layers of defense they had above their heads, the members of the expedition could not feel safe at all. A massive roar immediately erupted at the instant before magic spells, and the dragon breaths bombarded the defense of the expedition. The resplendent holy light battle song was distorted by the roar, and no longer sounded like a battle song. Instead, it sounded like a painful moan that was soon dispelled completely. At the instant that the holy light battle song disappeared, the holy light knights shuddered, and their faces turned extremely ashen. Blood even oozed out of their eyes and nostrils. Almost at the same time that the holy light battle song vanished, the holy light priests who were praying piously also suddenly sped up, raising the pitch of their voices. However, in just a moment, the holy light priests suddenly vomited blood, and were so weak that they fell on the ground. Seeing this scene, Archbishop Martin and Prince Jeremiah could not help but go through a major change in expression. They had just come in contact with the corpse dragons, yet the combat power of their underlings had already decreased greatly. Even if they survived this wave of attacks, the holy light knights and priests would probably be unable to play any role in the battle. In fact, they might not even be able to defend themselves. However, the attack of the corpse dragons had yet to end. At the instant that the holy light shield of the priests was shattered, the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom also began creaking and making sounds like they suffered from massive pressure, as if the sky had fallen down. The alchemy arrays that were casting light shields in front of the chests of the alchemy colossuses also began glowing at this moment as wisps of smoke continued to emerge from the formation. Bang, bang, bang! A series of explosions suddenly emerged from the alchemy colossuses, and the hexagonal light shields that formed a hive-like dome in the sky collapsed instantly. 3 successive layers of defense all collapsed in just one breath, and the violent magic spells and dragon breaths finally bombarded the Tower of Dusk's Mage Legion's elemental shield. The layers of elemental defense shattered and burst like bubbles. Although the mages still continued to cast defensive magic spells, their speed was much slower than the speed of the defensive layers shattering. The only advantage was that the defensive magic spells that the mages cast would not affect the mages in any way even if they were shattered. It was far better than the members of the brilliant shrine spitting blood and bleeding from every aperture. However, based on the situation before them, the Tower of Dusk's Mage Legion would not be able to sustain it for more than a few seconds, and by then, they probably would not be able to avoid extermination. Seeing the destructive attacks that were about to fall on them, Archbishop Martin and the others could not help but look desperate and hopeless. Previously, they had never thought that they would actually encounter such a desperate situation when exploring the Sky Castle. Although they would still be able to leave as they were peak legendary realm powerhouses, they did not have any spare energy to protect their subordinates, who were all elites that they had spent a lot of effort to nurture and groom. If all of them died here, they would not be able to accept the emotional blow, let alone explain the losses to their superiors when they returned. At this moment, Lin Li suddenly leapt into the air to face the catastrophe-like offensive spells without Helios Scepter, which he was used to using, or chanting any magic incantations. Be it Archbishop Martin or Donald, neither of them knew what Lin Li was planning to do exactly. They simply watched as he raised his palm and tapped it in the void gently, his body appearing extremely feeble in contrast to the magic storm. The seemingly powerless movement made the entire space vibrate vigorously all of a sudden, followed by a magic storm outside the elemental defense that was full of power vanishing in the blink of an eye like sand being blown away by the wind. At this moment, the entire world suddenly became incomparably silent. The only thing left was the figure that was floating in midair. What kind of power is this? It's the sanctuary realm. It definitely is the sanctuary realm. When Lin Li killed the undead elemental dragon previously, Archbishop Martin was already speculating in his heart that Lin Li had probably already entered the sanctuary realm. Now, he was even more certain that that was the case. There were hundreds of legendary level corpse dragons opposite them, many of which were at the peak of the legendary level. Only those with the power of the sanctuary realm would be able to resist such attacks effortlessly. Archbishop Martin was now a powerhouse at the peak of the legendary realm. In the eyes of others, it was just a step away from the sanctuary realm, but he was well aware deep down that he would still be considered a small fry in front of the true sanctuary powerhouses. If he did not take that last step, that was a difference in power itself. No matter how strong they might be, those in the legendary realm would still only be as powerful as mortals. In essence, they were far from being comparable to those in the sanctuary realm. Meanwhile, Donald and the rest from the Rotterdam Kingdom were dumbfounded too. They had originally thought that Lin Li was that powerful because he had some powerful magical weapon or even a legendary artifact. However, they had to admit that the power that Lin Li was displaying was definitely in the sanctuary realm, regardless of how unwilling they might be. The arrogance of the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom was crushed badly at this moment. They could no longer imagine what kind of world it was outside the Rotterdam Kingdom. Did the world outside already become this terrifying? A small, unknown force actually has so many legendary powerhouses, and is helmed by such a young sanctuary powerhouse. However, after feeling shocked, Archbishop Martin and Donald and the others did not seem too elated about Lin Li resisting the attack of the corpse dragons. They did not think that Lin Li would be able to kill the corpse dragons alone. Besides, other than the corpse dragons, there were other undead creatures around the expedition. However, in the defense just now, both the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom had suffered varying degrees of damage. Their remaining combat power would probably be insufficient for them to continue hanging on for the next clash. Donald and the others inevitably felt somewhat resentful towards Lin Li in such a situation. Had Lin Li made that move earlier, their alchemy colossuses would not have been damaged so severely. It was not strange for Donald to have such thoughts. After all, he knew himself that his cooperation with the Tower of Dusk was not that earnest. However, Donald dared not show his displeasure at all. If he were to really anger Lin Li, there would be many ways for him to destroy Donald's team and wipe them out. Even if he did not attack personally, Donald would definitely be unable to escape his demise, let alone his subordinates. The situation that the team from the Brilliant Shrine was in was actually far more dangerous than that of the Rotterdam Kingdom. After all, only one of the alchemy arrays of the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom was damaged. Their combat power was not affected greatly. However, the team of the Brilliant Shrine had been severely injured, be it the Holy Light Knights or the priests. They probably could not even exert half of their combat power. However, Archbishop Martin didn't have the same thoughts as Donald. Although he also felt that Lin Li had taken action too late, he felt that Lin Li had to have done so for a reason. After all, they were facing the attacks of hundreds of legendary level corpse dragons. Even a sanctuary powerhouse had to deal with it carefully. In fact, Lin Li had indeed only stepped into the sanctuary realm a few months ago. Just like what Archbishop Martin thought, he could easily deal with 8 to 10 enemies that were at the peak of the legendary realm, but if he wanted to wipe out hundreds of legendary level corpse dragons, he would have to have the strength of the 3 arbitrators. More importantly, this was the world created by the immortal king, not Anril. Lin Li managed to step into the sanctuary realm by relying on his understanding of the world laws of Anril. However, this world had strayed away from Anril, and there were many things that he had to understand and relearn. In fact, from the moment the expedition entered this world, Lin Li had already siphoned off some of his mental strength to analyze and decipher the structure of the laws of this world. Fortunately, he had devoured some of Osric's willpower in the previous world, which contained the knowledge that the immortal king used to create this world. That bit of knowledge was also the reason that Lin Li could have a mastery of the laws of this world so quickly after entering this undead world. Otherwise, Lin Li would probably have to patiently gain some enlightenment in this world for more than 10 days in order to do what he was doing now. Moreover, through his analysis of this world, Lin Li also knew that the core of this world was exactly the gigantic undead tree. The undead tree covered a portion of the ground and shielded it from the sun. The underground area was even more terrifying, with roots occupying almost the entire world. One might even suspect that the ground of this world itself was made up of those roots. The key to leaving this place undoubtedly lay in the gigantic undead tree. After resisting and defending against the corpse dragon's attacks, Lin Li, who had such knowledge, fixed the undead tree as his target. It was his true opponent in this world. However, Lin Li also knew that the expedition was in an unfavorable situation now. Although the team of the Tower of Dusk did not suffer many losses, they could not resist the attacks of the corpse dragons, let alone hold them up in that place. If the teams of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were intact, they might be able to do so together. However, they were now unable to offer much help. In this situation, how could Lin Li feel at ease leaving them to deal with the corpse dragons? If he were to do so, there would probably be barely any combatants, except a few legendary powerhouses left on his side before he could destroy the undead tree. He brought his subordinates there to train, not to court death. Otherwise, there would be no point even if he obtained the Sky Castle in the end. There was no way Lin Li could solve the issue faced by the Rotterdam Kingdom. Even with the Guru of Alchemy, Angelano, it would still take some time to repair the alchemy colossuses. He could not eliminate all the damage in the alchemy colossuses at once as if casting healing magic spells. Fortunately, the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom did not sustain severe damage, so their combat power was not affected much. In comparison, the problem faced by the Brilliant Shrine was undoubtedly the most serious. Although the Holy Light Knights and priests were not defenseless, they would be facing death by dealing with the corpse dragons on their own. However, Lin Li had just the right solution to that problem. At the same time, the people of the expedition who were on the ground were also worried about that problem, especially Archbishop Martin, who was looking straight at Lin Li in the air with his eyes, waiting to see what his next move would be. He was well aware that a sanctuary powerhouse would not be afraid of those corpse dragons, but it was still very difficult to protect a group of people who were barely able to resist under the siege of so many corpse dragons. Indeed, to a sanctuary powerhouse, even legendary powerhouses were insignificant existences. However, Lin Li, a sanctuary powerhouse, was just like a child compared to the three arbitrators. There was a fundamental difference between a child and a minion that didn't even deserve to be considered human. However, an excessive number of minions would cause a lot of trouble for the child. At this moment, Archbishop Martin suddenly discovered that Lin Li, who had just disintegrated the attack of the corpse dragons, was holding something that he did not have just a moment ago. It was an orb that was emitting white light. Archbishop Martin could sense an incomparably pure power that was full of holy aura from it. It was the pure power of light that even Pope Rosario never had. At the moment he felt that power, Archbishop Martin could not help but think of the scene of the arrival of the Holy Light depicted in the Doctrine of Light. Other than Archbishop Martin, all the Holy Light Knights and priests of the Brilliant Shrine's team were holding their breaths at this moment while looking at the sky and the light in Lin Li's hand with pious enthusiasm. Immediately afterwards, Lin Li raised the arm that he was using to hold Holy Light, and the light erupted violently in his hand instantly. It was as if a little sun had risen, and the entire area was filled with Holy Light. As Holy Light shone, the people of the Brilliant Shrine's team immediately felt a wave of divine power surging into their bodies. Not only did the injuries in their bodies heal immediately, even their souls were enhanced as they were shrouded in holy light. However, the people of the Brilliant Shrine's team did not shriek in shock at all. It was as if they did not care about the changes in their bodies at all. Instead, they gently chanted prayers that praised the holy light devoutly with tears in their eyes. To them, getting baptized by the holy light would allow them to die with no regrets even if they had to die immediately now. Under the illumination of the holy light, the corpse dragons that were initially fearless towards the power of light involuntarily retreated continuously. Although they no longer had the flaws of ordinary undead creatures after being modified by the immortal king, their fear of the power of holy light suddenly rose uncontrollably from the depths of their souls at this moment. The illumination of the holy light did not last long. It was only sustained for a second or two, before being retracted quickly. Hold these corpse dragons down, Lin Li instructed. After saying that, he suddenly vanished from above the expedition. When he appeared again, he was already at the back of the group of corpse dragons, and was flying straight towards the gigantic undead tree in the distance. Did he leave just like that? Archbishop Martin, who had awakened from the baptism of the holy light, was shocked to see the change. He knew that the holy light just now would definitely be of great help to his subordinates. However, even then, it would be hard to resist that huge horde of corpse dragons without a sanctuary powerhouse, based on the expedition's strength alone. The holy light is with me. I actually advanced by 2 levels, someone from the Brilliant Shrine's team yelled. However, there were soon many more shrieks of surprise, because they had advanced in level and abilities. At this moment, Archbishop Martin finally discovered that the team he was leading had experienced a manifold increase in strength after experiencing the baptism of holy light just now. Those who were originally only at level 17 or 18 had advanced to the peak of level 19, and while those who already had the strength of the peak of level 19 did not directly step into the legendary realm, their mana waves clearly contained a tinge of the laws of holy light. Hence, it was now even more likely that they would step into the legendary realm in the future. Surely this isn't a dream, is it? Even Pope Rosario can't do this. Archbishop Martin immediately thought about the item that was emitting holy light just now, and the fact that his subordinate's strength had surged. He was certain that it was definitely because of the holy light, since that item could actually increase the holy light devotee's abilities so drastically. It suggested that it was definitely not an ordinary magical object. Instead, It definitely had something to do with the Brilliant Shrine. If the Brilliant Shrine could own that item, it would definitely play an incomparable role in promoting the development of the Brilliant Shrine. As soon as they were baptized by the Holy Light once, the level 17 and 18 devotees of Holy Light managed to advance to the peak of level 19. There were many level 17 and 18 devotees in the Brilliant Shrine at present. If they could all advance to the peak of level 19, there would be many who could step into the legendary realm. However, Archbishop Martin was also well aware that it was basically impossible to truly obtain that item. The person who possessed that item was a true sanctuary powerhouse. Even Pope Rosario would not easily offend a sanctuary powerhouse. However, just because he couldn't get it, it didn't mean that he could not use it. Archbishop Martin soon thought of Lin Li's other identity, as the son of the Holy Light. Although Lin Li had always seemed unwilling to acknowledge that identity, facts were facts. He decided that if they could pull through this crisis safely this time, he'd better try and see if he could poach Lin Li to the Brilliant Shrine. Even if Lin Li was still unwilling to accept his identity as the son of the Holy Light, it would not be much of a problem to invite him to the Brilliant Shrine as a guest given the ties between the Tower of Dusk and the Brilliant Shrine. He felt that it would be a feasible idea to think of a way to use the power of that item to increase the strength of the Brilliant Shrine when Lin Li visited as a guest. In an instant, Archbishop Martin had already developed a plan and some thoughts of his own. However, the important thing at hand was how they could overcome the ordeal of the corpse dragons. If they could not pull through, all of his comprehensive thoughts would just remain in his imagination. At the thought of this, Archbishop Martin immediately perked up and began to organize his team members to face the corpse dragons. Seeing the changes in the Brilliant Shrine's team, Donald and the others were filled with extreme jealousy. In the blink of an eye, the members of the Brilliant Shrine had not only regained their combat power, but had also surged several times in strength. Meanwhile, the alchemy colossuses could only be repaired if they stopped to do so and allowed them to recover. It was hard to tell if their men and the alchemy colossuses were at an advantage or not. Besides, what really worried Donald was the fact that the relationship between the Tower of Dusk and the Brilliant Shrine would definitely be strengthened as they got closer as a result of this incident. That would be akin to causing his team to become even more alienated. Donald was well aware that Lin Li had something that was important to the Brilliant Shrine, but he knew that Archbishop Martin was not a reckless man. He would not think of using force to fight against that sanctuary powerhouse. Hence, Donald could totally imagine that although Archbishop Martin wouldn't bend his back to Lin Li, he would still be kissing his feet. This would definitely disrupt the harmony within the expedition. How am I going to deal with my disadvantaged position? Donald felt a headache thinking about it. Yet, the present situation did not give Donald the luxury of time to contemplate the matter. The horde of corpse dragons had made a comeback after Lin Li left. Donald could only put this thought at the back of his mind and focus on proving the worth of his team in this battle. He would not want to be disowned by the other two teams. Lin Li's departure brought away the holy light that previously deterred the horde of corpse dragons. Sensing that the uncomfortable light had disappeared, the dragons regained their menace and charged towards the expedition. This time, the team was unlike before. They did not allow themselves to be passively beaten. The mages from the Tower of Dusk grabbed the chance to whip up all sorts of powerful spells, launching them at corpse dragons like a storm. At the same time, Conorus, Basil, and the other legendary powerhouses from the Tower of Dusk flew up the sky and dealt with the dragons with their most powerful combat skills. Conorus challenged 3 corpse dragons with his eternal frost blade. His formidable perfect body was not a little disadvantaged by the direct confrontation. Although the abilities of Basil, Lord of Nightmares, Crimson Dragon, and Demon Gordon were not as freaky as those of Conorus, their combat skills were not to be trifled with. They might not be capable of confronting the hundreds of legendary dragons head-on, but were able to create confusion within the horde. Ufalusi and Norfaler stopped dealing with the remaining vampires and joined the team to battle against the dragons. After all, the horde of corpse dragons was a much larger threat to the expedition in comparison to the defeated vampires. They knew they could hand those vampires to the people from the Rotterdam and Brilliant Shrine. At the same time, the Dracolic twins received Lin Li's order through Gloomy Dark. They stopped resisting the undead army of the greater demons and returned to the expedition like bolts of lightning to delay the corpse dragons. They brought the death and poison domain to the team and turned many corpse dragons green. The Death Knights rose to the air with the help of their shapeshifters. They formed the Infinite Kill formation above the expedition and surrounded a few corpse dragons maliciously. As half of the team of Death Knights had already progressed to become Retribution Knights, the power of the Infinite Kill formation had also been raised by a dozen times. Although the corpse dragons were in level 22 and 23, they could not overcome the Infinite Kill formation at all. Archbishop Martin knew Lin Li's plan. When he saw the situation, He passed the authority to command the Holy Light Knights and priests to Jeremiah, and brought a few legendary level priests to join the battle in the sky. After being baptized by the Holy Light, Archbishop Martin and the rest started to cast spells that manifested the Holy Light, although the Immortal King had transformed those corpse dragons to be almost immune to the Purge spell. The trace of Holy Light within the Purge spell made it seem like they were casting Holy Light magic on them. The world created by the Immortal King was based on the laws that originated from the debris of the stars. The debris of the stars present in the Holy Light magic was like a direct attack on the basic laws. This was even more powerful than transforming the laws. This was equivalent to having dictatorship over the world. Archbishop Martin and the rest were like apostles, who had been endowed with power by their sovereign. Although that power was very minimal, it was enough to sanction the undead creatures with the Holy Light. Despite being hesitant when he saw the intense battle in the sky, Donald gritted his teeth and flew up with his legendary level mages. His initial plan was to stay on the ground to fight the low-level undead creatures. After all, it was too dangerous to fight legendary level corpse dragons. However, how could he prove his worth if he didn't put himself out there? As the legendary powerhouses left, the expedition on the ground was once again surrounded by the undead army. The skeletal warriors, skeletal mages, vampires, great demons, and many undead beasts surrounded the team and launched waves of merciless attacks. It was fortunate that the Rotterdam and Brilliant Shrine left Canberra and Jeremiah to take charge of the situation on the ground. They were at the peak of the legendary level, and although the danger was real even with them in command, they were just able to hold their teams against the undead army. Just like Archbishop Martin and his team, the Brilliant Shrine had the Holy Light within their spells after their abilities were enhanced. They recovered their ability to resist the undead creatures with their Purge spell, and were dealing with lower level creatures between level 10 and level 20. Of course, the team with the most solid performance was the mages from the Tower of Dusk. Although they could not match up to the real legendary level mages, their net array gave them the ability not only to work together, but also separately. That was not in the ability of the legendary level mages. The mages from the Tower of Dusk could come together to cast the legendary level spells with the highest level, and cast huge amounts of middle level legendary spells to create a magic storm at the same time. They could even rain low level spells over the entire domain. Hence, although they were surrounded by the attacks from uncountable undead creatures, they had an empty area around them. Any undead creature that trespassed in that region would immediately be engulfed by a tremendous amount of magic. After the departure of the many legendary powerhouses, the expedition could only maintain the deadlock with the undead army. However, there was no need for them to progress. The most important thing for them to do at this point in time was to defend and protect their own lives. It was the same with the battle in the air. The most important job was not to kill the corpse dragons, but to help Lin Li keep them here. However, while the legendary level powerhouses from the expedition had the advantage at the start for catching the corpse dragons unprepared, the power of the hundreds of corpse dragons brought these mages into the state of passive defense very quickly. Although Connorus was at the peak of the legendary realm, and had the tenacious perfect body, he had to remain passive against 2-3 dragons no matter how reluctant he was. It was imaginable for the rest. Norfaler had to use a speed as swift as lightning to move within the horde. It was not easy to slay the dragons, either. His role was leaning more towards being a firefighter. At this time, Lin Li had gotten nearer to the undead tree to get a better look at it. To Lin Li, the undead tree was like one that reached into the sky. Its luscious crown covered the sky like a seal. The thorns on the trunk were like vertices of mountains, and they were surrounded by grayish-black fog. However, just when Lin Li was about to fly towards the tree to get a closer look, shadows fell from the tree crown. He could recognize many different types of abyssal demons, including the Mostu demons from the 61st level, the Cum demons from the 70th level, and the fire demons without fire. All of these demons had something in common. All of them emitted an undead aura. It was obvious that they had been converted to demonic liches by the Immortal King. Although there were only dozens of them, they were all in level 23 and 24. Lin Li was not afraid of these demonic liches, but he was very clear about the situation of the expedition thanks to updates from Ufalusi and Norfaler. There was no time for him to wrestle with these demonic liches. Xiao Hua, help me deal with them. Lin Li lifted his arms and flashed out the ring of Dream Garden without hesitation. At this time, Lin Li could not help but secretly rejoice. The modified dragon crystal had helped to enhance Xiao Hua's powers tremendously. If not for that, Lin Li would really need to waste his time with these creatures. Lin Li's summons brought Xiao Hua out of the Dream Garden. Xiao Hua brought along a magic storm, made up of legendary level spells as he charged towards the bunch of demonic liches. The dragon that was at the peak of level 24 had the ability to challenge normal sanctuary powerhouses with his never-ending mana and massive powers to cast legendary spells instantaneously. The demonic liches were not pleased with Xiaohui's welcome gift. They activated their magical defense and readied themselves for the battle. Unlike the skeletal warriors who had no concept of life and death, these were high-level undead creatures. They could sense the formidable energy within Xiaohui's magic storm. Lin Li was not worried when left the liches to Xiaohua as he flew towards the undead tree. He thought that there shouldn't be any more obstacles this time, but this thought vanished as soon as it appeared in his mind. Something came towards Lin Li, and he had to dodge to the side. There was a gigantic vine that swooped in the air like a streak of lightning that came with thunder. The speed and force it was moving, it seemed to have the ability to break apart any space. If it were to land on a human, it might whip him into powder. This was not the end. Lin Li felt that something was amiss as soon as he dodged that vine. He put on the space robe and shifted his body to various locations speedily. There were more vines bursting from the ground that chased after Lin Li. They created a cacophony in the air. Very quickly, the ground was covered with the whip-like vines. They were like a nest of snakes that danced crazily to wipe Lin Li's shadows out. In the process, that powerful force created cracks in the space. It continued to compress the space that Lin Li could escape to. At this time, Lin Li realized that those were not vines. Those were the roots of the undead tree. It was obvious that this tree had its consciousness and knew how to protect its territory. Boom! Lin Li created a light and darkness sword and slashed at the roots that chased after him. Yet, the powerful wave only managed to cut off a dozen roots before it was shattered by them. Those roots had already transcended the abilities of common plants. Each of the roots had tremendous space power and formidable destructive power. Lin Li had never imagined an undead tree would have sanctuary level powers. With its level 26 or 27 abilities, the tree was even more powerful than him. Lin Li felt that he had hit an iron plate. He could not go near the trunk of the undead tree and had to stay a distance away from it due to its merciless roots. Lin Li inquired about the situation of the expedition using his mental strength. He could not help but feel anxious after ascertaining that the team would definitely not last for long. Their enemies were too formidable. As much as he was not bothered by the lives of the people from the Rotterdam and Brilliant Shrine, Lin Li would never not consider his followers the same. It would not matter to the strength of the entire force, no matter how many lives this mission claimed from the Rotterdam and Brilliant Shrine. This was not the same for the Tower of Dusk. After all, its foundation was not solid enough. The team of mages made up more than half of the elites from the Tower of Dusk. Lin Li couldn't afford to lose them. Lin Li was absolutely positive that this tree was the key for them to leave this world. While he could not be sure how it could help, he knew that getting rid of it was the first step. If not, even if he were to find a passageway out of here, even the legendary powerhouses might not be able to follow him out. But the question was, how the hell was he supposed to get rid of this tree? Although Lin Li was a sanctuary powerhouse, he did not have the confidence that he had the power to fell such a formidable tree. He could not possibly use an axe to cut down the tree like a lumberjack. Lin Li managed to buy himself some time to equip himself with debris of the stars, polar snow. As he recited a spell quickly, the temperature in the air dropped, and snowflakes fell from the void. This was the legendary level snow element spell, Snow Heaven. Every snowflake contained incredible coldness sufficient to create an entire mountain of ice. The flying snowflakes impeded the movement of the roots and froze them very quickly. As the temperature fell, the frozen roots broke and fell on the ground like shattered glass. However, before Lin Li could sigh in relief, and as the effect of Snow Heaven was about to die out, a strong and thick root broke out of the soil. It whizzed towards Lin Li's body very swiftly. That immense force was adequate to whip a mountain apart. Even if it was the earth, it would cause a gigantic crack. There was no doubt about the effectiveness of the Snow Heaven on the roots of the undead tree. However, Lin Li was not satisfied by its effect. God knew how many roots the undead tree had. Looking at the growth scale of the giant tree, it was not an exaggeration to say that the earth was made up of its roots. However, this did not disappoint Lin Li, for his eyes lit up with a realization. While it was true that the undead tree had a lot of roots, just like the dense canopy, it had to have a main trunk. If he were to get rid of that, the tree branches would naturally lose their vitality. What Lin Li had to do was to get closer to the trunk of the undead tree to chop the vital branch off. Yet, knowing where it was one thing, and having the ability to cut it was another. Since the undead tree had its consciousness, it would only be natural for the tree branches to pay extra attention to guard its vital branch. As it was a huge tree, it was only normal for it to have numerous branches. Yet, it would be an arduous task to locate and cut off each of them. Lin Li had no other choice but to take the leap of faith. After making the decision, he activated the space robe and bolted towards the tree trunk. That undead tree either seemed to have guessed Lin Li's intention, or just did not want him to be near it. Its strong and thick roots sprung out from the soil crazily. Some chased after Lin Li, while the rest tried to block him from the front. Knowing that Lin Li was using space power, the roots that were waving frantically created multiple traps that were made up of the layers of cracks in the space. Although the tree roots created a lot of problems for Lin Li, they very conveniently helped him figure out where to look for the main branch. Very quickly, Lin Li overcame the obstacles and got close to the trunk of the undead tree. He took out the debris of the stars, nothingness, aimed it at his target and activated it. While Lin Li did not have a way to quickly break through the thick soil layer, he thought of using nothingness to create a huge crack on the ground to cut off the connection between the tree trunk and roots. The tremendous shatter that followed showed Lin Li that his approach was right. This proved a point as well. The debris of the stars had a greater space power at its command than the undead tree. Lin Li only needed to wave his debris of the stars to cut all the tree branches. It was even more powerful than the light and darkness sword. When more roots rushed Lin Li, he teleported in another direction. He waved nothingness towards the ground like before, but it did not seem like it was the right place. The undead tree did not have any response this time. However, Lin Li was not anxious like before. He thought that he could just draw a circle around the trunk of the undead tree to rid it of all its roots. Of course, for convenience's sake, Lin Li tried to use nothingness on the tree trunk, but it created a crack in space that healed immediately. It was obvious that the tree trunk had a tremendous defense mechanism. Since it had a higher level than Lin Li, it was impossible for him to cut the tree trunk directly. Lin Li circled the trunk of the undead tree and waved nothingness at its roots constantly. Lin Li was like a bug that moved amidst dense grass, and the roots that were chasing and obstructing him were like weeds swaying in the wind. If one were to look closely, the roots that were affected by nothingness would lose energy and decay, turning into ashes within a few breaths. As Lin Li worked his way through, lesser roots surfaced from the ground. The ground and the trunk of the undead tree trembled as though they were enduring great pain. Finally, the spurs on the tree started to drop, and the ashen tree bark revealed a faint color of green. Lin Li stopped moving. He saw that there were no roots coming for him anymore. Lin Li stood in the air silently. He watched the bark change its color, and the leaves recover their greenness. However, not long after the giant tree recovered its color, it toppled. Lin Li was not surprised by this sight. This world was like a reversed world. Life in Anral was death in this world. The tree regaining its green was equivalent to the tree withering and yellowing in Anral. Life here was death in Anral. The fallen tree was like a mountain that collapsed. The fall of the tree shook the entire world. A black whirlpool gate appeared. It was like the gate to leave this world. However, Lin Li would not leave by himself. He bolted towards the door and picked up a seed that was the size of a fist. Lin Li had not known the origin of the undead tree, but when he held the seed in his hands, there was a familiar aura that came to him. He was surprised to discover that it was the seed of the Tree of Eternity. Lin Li was extremely familiar with the Seed of Eternity. During his first visit to the Sky Castle, he acquired one at the Central Tower. However, that seed had already been dead. What was left was the massive mana within it. It was with the help of High Priest Rog and the crack of the Eternal Darkness altar that he managed to use a branch of the Tree of Eternity to revive the seed. Lin Li could clearly sense from this Seed of Eternity that there was tremendous life force within it. The aura felt the same as when the other seed was revived. Yet, Lin Li could not understand why a living seed of eternity would appear after the death of the undead tree. However, Lin Li knew there was no time for him to contemplate this matter. Although the undead tree had fallen, the expedition was still surrounded by undead creatures. Lin Li put the seed of eternity into his ring of endless storm and shot back to the expedition. The collapse of the undead tree seemed to decrease the power of the undead creatures in this world. With the addition of a sanctuary powerhouse like Lin Li, the battle results were conceivable. Lin Li first helped Xiao Hua slay those demonic liches, then charged into the horde of corpse dragons. Xiao Hua cast the elemental storm without taking breaks. The mutated corpse dragons were engulfed by it one after another. There were no corpse dragons that could withstand the storm. Lin Li, on the other hand, was even more straightforward as he held the holy light in one hand and gloomy dark in the other. Pure white light intertwined with deep black glow, as they worked together to strangle mutated corpse dragons one by one. The gate to leave is just ahead. After a while, hundreds of mutated corpse dragons were slain. Lin Li activated the power of the holy light and covered the expedition with holy light. It drove the skeletal warriors and other undead creatures away. None of them dared to charge at the expedition anymore. Very quickly, the expedition got through the gate below the undead tree and entered another space. This space seemed like the space they had been in before entering the undead world. It seemed to be part of the central tower. Here, the exhausted expedition could finally take a breather. It was the same for the legendary powerhouses. All of them felt a deep sense of relief. The physical exhaustion was not the problem. the mental exhaustion was unbearable. After Archbishop Martin, Donald, and the rest of them reorganized their teams, they immediately became like deflated balloons. They quickly found a place to sit down without even minding their image. Although the mages from the Tower of Dusk had magical equipment with the highest ranking, the journey had drained their mental strength greatly. However, they did not take a break like the people from other forces. Under Alan's orders, some of them continued to stand guard, while the rest of them started to meditate. Archbishop Martin and Donald could not help but gasp at the behavior of the mages from the Tower of Dusk. They finally understood why the team from the Tower of Dusk had such formidable combat prowess. It was clear that having special magic arrays was not the sole reason for the prosperity of the tower. Perseverance and discipline were another significant reason behind their performance. In the world of Alana, from 1,300 years ago, the people from the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam acquired many treasures from Osric's palace. But it seemed like they had suffered losses in the undead world this time, especially so for the team from the Rotterdam, which depleted large amounts of magical crystals they'd acquired in Osric's palace. Yet what it gained was the destruction of their alchemy colossuses, and the damage of most of their defensive mechanisms. This damage was enough to give Donald a heartache. As for the team from the Brilliant Shrine, it would not be fair to say that they did not have any benefits. After all, the abilities of their paladins and priests were greatly enhanced with the help of Lin Li's debris of the stars, holy light. Originally, Archbishop Martin thought that this booster was a short-lived one. He was worried that it would be like enhanced holy light magic that had after effects. However, Martin realized from the reorganization that no trace of the increased power seemed to be decreasing. As he sighed with relief, he started to think about what he had been contemplating earlier. Yet, he knew that this was not the time to discuss that. Hence, he planned to leave it till his team had its rest and was ready to set off. The Tower of Dusk was the only team that reaped real rewards from their mission in the undead world. Not to mention that Lin Li had acquired a seed of eternity. The benefits gained by his undead followers were considerable enough. Through the continuous battles in the undead world, the Death Knights had the opportunity to swallow large amounts of soul fire, and part of the team succeeded in advancing into Retribution Knights. Now, the team of Death Knights could just be renamed as a team of Retribution Knights, for there were just a few Death Knights left in the team. Moreover, the Death Knights that were left were all at the peak of level 19. Their progress to the next stage was just a matter of time. Next, there were also Ufalusi and Norfaler, who were already at the peak of the legendary realm. While it was not impossible, it would be an arduous task for them to step into the sanctuary realm just by engulfing the soul fire. However, being enlightened by the true essence of the laws in the undead world was the greatest reward they could ever wish for. To undead creatures, there was only one way for them to seek enlightenment about the undead world. That was to leave Anral to enter the undead world that belonged to the undead. Hence, in normal circumstances, they would only find their way to the sanctuary realm in the undead world. The three undead lords of the Shadowglen were at level 22 and level 23 when they established the contract with Garesco. Yet, their power was still the same after thousands of years in Anral. This was because they did not have the real understanding of the undead world to master the essence of its laws. If they had entered the undead world long ago, they might have become undead lords in the sanctuary realm. However, the legendary undead world was a blatant place where only the fittest survived. The only way to survive there was by power. The undead creatures swallowed one another's soul fire, the undead lords fought over territories, and the defeated could only lose their soul fire. Hence, not every undead creature from Anral would have the courage to enter the undead world. Even if they had the ability of the three undead lords from the Shadowglen, they would not be sure that they could have the confidence to survive in the undead world. Furthermore, there was little chance for anyone to return to Anral from the undead world. If there was a necromancer who could cast the tide of death to summon huge amounts of undead creatures from there, any undead lord would be in great danger. Perhaps only an existence like the Immortal King could have the ability to summon such undead creatures with the tide of death. Ufalusi and Norfaler had the honor to enter the undead world that was created by the Immortal King, and to be enlightened by the true essence of the laws within it. They would not need to take a trip of no return to the undead world now. As long as they comprehended this essence, they had great potential to step into the sanctuary realm. This was the same for Ufalusis Crimson Dragon and Lin Li's Red Dragon. While they acquired huge amounts of soul fire, they had the same comprehension of the essence of the laws within the undead world. This meant that the doors of Sanctuary Realm had opened slightly for them, and were waiting for their arrival. While Lin Li was clear about the benefits his followers gained from the undead world, this was not his current focus. He was contemplating his earlier query. What is the relationship between the Tree of Eternity and the undead tree? Why did a living seed of eternity appear after the collapse of the undead tree. The thought of the all-encompassing undead tree helped him relate to how it had been said that the Tree of Eternity was in charge of the progress of the High Elves. Lin Li gained a vague sense of understanding when he linked all the thoughts to the first dead seed he acquired from the central tower. Perhaps a mortal king only had 2 seeds of eternity that were dead. Perhaps he created the undead world with the intention to grow the dead seed. This was the same for undead creatures. The passing of a life meant another form of birth. The death of undead creatures did not conform to the transition between life and earth when they lost their soul fire. Since the Tree of Eternity did not have any soul fire, its death in the undead world would be another form of birth. This might be been the motive of the immortal king, to create a cycle between life and death. Of course, the deeper rules and mysteries were not what Lin Li could comprehend clearly with his present knowledge and experience. However, he could tell from the superficial clues that the immortal king had achieved the cycle between life and death. The death of the undead tree in the undead world was birth in the form of the seed of eternity. However, the thought that he was about to acquire 2 trees of eternity excited Lin Li. His eyes lit up when he thought about the story he'd heard before he transmigrated to Anral. In the game lore of the Endless World, it had been said that the High Elves were born from the Tree of Eternity. However, there was only one Tree of Eternity in Anral. What could be the mystery underlying this? It seemed foolish to relate Anral with the Endless World. However, after his experiences in Anral, Lin Li could be sure that there had to be some connection between the 2 worlds. He had questions. Why did the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars and stars of fury from the game only appear in Anral, but left no stories in Anral? Also, why did the Whispering God from the Endless World appear in Prince Bahir's mausoleum? And why did I enter my endless labyrinth on the last day of my exploration of the Sky Castle? These questions were enough to let Lin Li believe that there had to be many things in common between Anral and the Endless World. Hence, Lin Li could not avoid pondering the reason why the High Elves only had 1 Tree of Eternity in Anral, but were not birthed from the tree like what happened in the Endless World. Lin Li had no idea about the reason behind all these discoveries. He naturally could not obtain the answers to these questions. However, he remembered from the legends of the Endless World that the High Elves that were birthed from the Tree of Eternity achieved greater prosperity than the High Elves in Anral. They ruled the entire world for a longer time and achieved greater advancements. Since they were the same race, the only difference had to lay in the Tree of Eternity. This thought gave Lin Li greater anticipation. If he were to plant this seed in the Tower of Dusk, what would happen to the development of the tower with their 2 trees of eternity? Master Flick, I wonder if you have time for a chat, said Archbishop Martin smilingly. His tone was a little unusual. It was as if he was trying to suppress his laughter. Lin Li was someone who respected his elders. Although he had stepped into the sanctuary realm, he maintained the same respect for an elder like Archbishop Martin. He invited Archbishop Martin to be seated in a chair beside him. Please be seated, Archbishop. I suppose you have plans for the expedition, asked Lin Li. The most important thing for them to do was to explore the Sky Castle. Hence, Lin Li naturally thought of the Sky Castle when he saw Archbishop Martin approach them. After all, Archbishop Martin had always been approaching him to discuss plans regarding the expedition. This time, Archbishop Martin became embarrassed when he heard Lin Li's question. Master Flick, I think that it has been quite some time since you visited the Brilliant Shrine after you rid Pope of the Viper's poison, said Martin after some hesitation. Archbishop Martin knew that Lin Li did not really see himself as the son of the Holy Light. Hence, he did not mention it immediately. He started by talking about the incident that had happened to Pope Rosario in the past. However, Lin Li froze when he heard Archbishop Martin. He thought that his speech was not really relevant. The most important matter right now was to explore the Sky Castle. Why would he mention the bygones? This was not a time for reminiscence. Archbishop Martin felt extremely awkward when he saw Lin Li's confusion. It did not feel right to invite someone over just because he was of use to them. However, the thought of how the power of the Holy Light had helped to boost his men by a level or 2 was really tempting. Archbishop Martin just had to thicken his face for this matter. Master Flick, I was wondering if you would have time to visit the Brilliant Shrine after this expedition. I presume that the Pope would love to see you now that you are in the Sanctuary Realm, said Archbishop Martin. He mentioned Pope Rosario in hopes of persuading Lin Li to agree to make the visit. He felt that since Lin Li only entered the Sanctuary Realm recently, he would love to have someone to discuss new ideas with. Although the request made by Archbishop Martin was not very timely, Lin Li did not try to infer his underlying intentions. Furthermore, he was clear that since he was making use of light and darkness as his foundation in the Sanctuary Realm, conversing with Pope Rosario would not be a bad idea. Hence, Lin Li did not reject Martin's suggestion. Archbishop Martin, you are too courteous. I had plans to discuss some matters with the Pope a long time ago. If we are to complete the exploration safely this time, I will head to Brilliant Shrine, agreed Lin Li readily. Archbishop Martin sighed in relief when he heard Lin Li's reply. His eyes lit up and showed great, insuppressible happiness. That's great, Masterfullick. That's a deal then. Lin Li was still puzzling over Archbishop Martin's excitement over his agreement to head to the shrine when he swept his gaze at the team from the Brilliant Shrine. Then, he finally understood Martin's intentions. However, Lin Li was not worried about the Brilliant Shrine being interested in his holy light. If it had been the past, he would have been extremely worried. Now that he had entered the sanctuary realm, he was certain that Rosario would not want to have a bad relationship with him just for the holy light. Donald from the Rotterdam watched intently when he saw the passionate exchange Lin Li and Archbishop Martin were having with each other. He could not help but start to worry. Since the three teams had met, Donald had always seen the Tower of Dusk as a team who was there to make up the numbers. He would not have thought that the Tower of Dusk, a force he had not heard of before, would have such a sanctuary powerhouse he could only look up to. I originally planned to get close to the Brilliant Shrine's team and try to maintain a certain balance with the Tower of Dusk with the power of the two forces. However, the Brilliant Shrine's team is obviously standing on the Tower of Dusk's side now. Doesn't that mean that my team is in danger now? Donald now had to consider whether he should also find a chance to impress the sanctuary powerhouse of the Tower of Dusk and curry his favor. However, the problem was that there was nothing he could offer. His only forte was his techniques in creating alchemy colossuses. However, the Tower of Dusk had a dwarf master of alchemy / metallurgist whose attainments he was unclear of. In fact, Donald even wondered if the dwarf metallurgist was a legendary guru of alchemy, because he'd managed to discover so many issues with the work of the best metallurgist of the Rotterdam Kingdom. In the past, Donald and the others would still try to find excuses by saying that Angelano had probably discovered some secrets that already existed in the alchemy colossuses in the first place. However, now that he thought about it, he felt that the excuse was way too ridiculous. How could the metallurgist under a sanctuary powerhouse really be incapable? Actually, he had just found excuses in the past because he had been unwilling to face reality. Alchemy was the forte of the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom, but their skill in alchemy was of no value to a guru of alchemy. Donald thought about the miserable situation that his team was about to face, and was suddenly at a loss for what to do. Not to mention the cooperation between the Brilliant Shrine and the Tower of Dusk. Even if the Brilliant Shrine decided to stay in a neutral position, the Tower of Dusk's team would be able to destroy them easily just with the strength of the sanctuary powerhouse alone. While thinking about it, Donald couldn't help but fix his gaze on the undead servants, Ufalusi and Norfaler, who were on the Tower of Dusk's side. All of a sudden, a beam of light flashed in his eyes, as if a bolt of lightning had cleared the fog in his brain. He immediately came up with an idea. However, after getting an idea, Donald did not immediately look for Lin Li. Since Lin Li had just had an intimate conversation with Archbishop Martin, it was clearly not the time for him to suck up to him now. The expedition recuperated there for a while. Actually, the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom were what required the most of their time. The members of the team from the Brilliant Shrine had all been baptized by holy light and had their abilities improved greatly. They only needed to rest their minds for a while. However, Lin Li did not want to give up the cannon fodder of the Rotterdam Kingdom just yet. Even though he was racing against time and against Osric, he still gave the team from the Rotterdam Kingdom enough time to repair the alchemy colossuses. Once the team from the Rotterdam Kingdom had prepared everything, the expedition finally set off again. According to the information that they had gotten during the exploration while some were resting, they arrived at a gate of this floor. To be frank, the people from the expedition couldn't help but feel terrified at the thought of the gate with the black vortex and the intense battle in the two realms previously. God knew what kind of world was waiting for them behind the gate. It might just become their burial ground. However, they had no choice but to enter, because other than that gate, there was no other door for them to pass through on this entire floor. Hence, at the instant that they stepped through the gate, almost everyone couldn't help but take a deep breath. Passing through the gate, the expedition arrived in yet another world. However, when Lin Li saw this world, he was stunned because it had an extraordinary significance to Lin Li. It was something that he could never truly forget no matter how many years had passed. It was an absolutely unimaginable and majestic palace that emitted a golden glow and grandeur, as if only the supreme celestial gods were fit to set foot in it. Facing such a palace, almost everyone felt small and insignificant. It was as if standing there was an unforgivable blasphemy. The massive palace was large and majestic, and it resembled a god looking down on the mortals. The golden rays of light filled the entire space, and no one dared to look at it at all. Standing in front of the glorious palace, everyone involuntarily began breathing softly even though it was just a lifeless palace. The incomparably somber ambience made each and every one of them feel oppressed. They had never felt that kind of shock and pressure before. Even when they were facing the Sky Castle, that was a condensation of the wisdom of the High Elves, they could not imagine that such a palace which could not be described in words at all would exist in this world. Even the most magnificent High Elven buildings described in history were probably far inferior to the palace before them now. However, the reason for Lin Li's shock was different from others. He was not stunned by the grandeur of the majestic building, but because of the overlapping of his memories and reality. Yes, in the eyes of others, they had never seen this palace before. However, Lin Li was no stranger to it, because it was called the Well of the Sun. The name Well of the Sun came from the world of the game that Lin Li had played before he transmigrated. According to the background story of the game's setting, the Tree of Eternity collapsed and caused the entire world to enter a frenzy of mana, forming a massive collapse of the space. It also caused a huge rift on the mainland. Of course, Lin Li was not familiar with the Well of the Sun only because he understood the background story well. It was because he had entered the Well of the Sun before. Technically, it was his main player character, the Hunter, who did. However, that made no difference. He had also obtained the Stars of Fury from the Well of the Sun. After Lin Li arrived in Anril and discovered the relationship between Anril and the Endless World, especially after obtaining the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, he had also once tried to find some information about the Well of the Sun. He wanted to try and see if he could regain the Stars of Fury from the Well of the Sun in this world. However, to Lin Li's surprise, there was no information about the Well of the Sun in the world of Anril. Besides, it was not because of an information blockade, but because neither the Brilliant Shrine and Darkness Shrine, nor the Supreme Council had any information about the Well of the Sun in their archives. In the Endless World, the Well of the Sun was a rather peculiar and terrifying place. Rumor had it that one end of it was completely connected to the Endless Abyss, and after the collapse of the Tree of Eternity, there had been endless abyssal demons that swarmed into Anril through the Well of the Sun, causing massive disasters. Besides, the disasters caused by the Well of the Sun had never ended even during the era of human civilization in the Endless World. Every now and then, the major kingdoms of the world in the game issued large-scale group quests to rally players to go deal with the abyssal demons that surged out of the Well of the Sun. If those disasters had also occurred in Anril, they would have definitely been recorded in history, as such matters simply couldn't be covered up even if one tried. At one point, the outcome even made Lin Li, who thought that there had to be a relationship between the two worlds, to begin doubting his own conjectures. However, in the world of Anril, the collapse of the Tree of Eternity did cause some consequences. In fact, the collapse caused one of the largest spatial rifts in the entire world, in the spot where the tree had collapsed. However, it was also the safest one. The mention of a spatial rift would often make people change their expressions, for several famous black currents in history had brought about absolute horror to the people in the world. Besides, there was also the fall of the Darkness Shrine. The Great Rift in the Eternal Darkness Altar caused the disaster that almost completely annihilated the Darkness Shrine from the world. Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine had also gotten poisoned by a viper during a black current. However, there had never been any magical beasts that surged out of the rift in the space where the Tree of Eternity collapsed to harm humans. In fact, in the surroundings of the spatial rift, the environment was no different compared to other places, and there were no leakage of mana or any vigorous and abnormal fluctuations. Rumor had it that the largest space rift was almost harmless in the world of Anril. As long as one did not go too close and end up getting caught in it, they could just pretend it didn't exist. Due to the fact that the large spatial rift looked like a whirlpool, it was also known as the Great Whirlpool. Hence, Lin Li had always been troubled about whether the Well of the Sun existed or not. Facing this glorious palace, Lin Li finally understood that Anril did have the Well of the Sun, but the Immortal King had integrated it into his own world domain. However, that matter gave Lin Li another question. How did the Immortal King move the Well of the Sun there? Of course, Lin Li believed that it shouldn't be difficult to do with the Immortal King's strength, but the issue was the timing of the appearance of the Well of the Sun. According to the legends of the Endless World, the Well of the Sun appeared due to the fall of the Tree of Eternity. In reality, before the Tree of Eternity collapsed, the Well of the Sun should have been named the Sun Palace, which was one of the 2 greatest palaces of the High Elves. The other one was called the Moon Palace, but it was nowhere to be found after the Great War, and it did not leave behind any traces or clues in Anril. However, in the history of Anril, the Tree of Eternity was destroyed by Garesko, the god of mages, roughly at the end of the Dark Age. The collapse of the Tree of Eternity was precisely what caused the High Elves to lose all hope of turning the situation around, thus allowing the rebellion forces of the various races to achieve the final victory. However, at that time, Several years had passed since the immortal king had gone missing. How did he appear again to take the well of the sun away? Could it be that he had been watching coldly from the sidelines all this time as the high elves got wiped out? In the past, the dragon of destruction Azardus had foreseen the rise of the high elves and tried to destroy the tree of eternity, but he ended up getting killed by the immortal king. If the immortal king had been watching Anril, why did he protect the high elves at first before allowing the tree of eternity to fall and the high elves to be annihilated later? Could it be that the immortal king feared Garesko's strength? Although that conjecture seemed a bit ridiculous, the immortal king wasn't far from Garesko, who was already closed to the existence of a god. The fact that he could kill the dragon of destruction was enough to prove that the immortal king was probably just as able as real gods. However, in the history of Anril, there had never been records of Garesko fighting the immortal king, and it seemed that the two powerhouses that appeared one after another in Anril did not have a chance to meet at all. At the thought of the issue of time, Lin Li couldn't help but remember another thing. When he had first explored the Sky Castle, the elves team found the unicorn that had supposedly given them hope when they had been held captive in the prison of the Central Tower. In the legends of the elves, the unicorn was the mount of the goddess of nature who had purified the entire poisonous land of death and turned it into the current emerald forest that was full of vitality. However, after the purification, the unicorn somehow disappeared for no reason. Legend had it that the goddess of nature had once given the elves an oracle, but the elves settled down in the emerald forest after the end of the Dark Age. Could it be that the immortal king already possessed the ability to transmigrate and time travel? Although his conjecture seemed a little absurd and far-fetched, Lin Li knew that such a possibility existed in Anril. In fact, the Dragon of Time, which was one of the 5 dragon aspects, had the ability to travel through the past and future, thus making it the most mysterious dragon aspect. However, no matter what the truth was, there was at least something for Lin Li to rejoice about. After all, compared to the 2 previous worlds, he had explored the Well of the Sun before. Even though it would not be exactly the same as what he remembered, he would not be wandering around aimlessly like a headless fly. Besides, precisely because of his familiarity with the Well of the Sun, Lin Li was well aware that it would be more dangerous to wander around the Well of the Sun as compared to the previous 2 worlds. By now, the members of the expedition had already been standing in front of the palace gate of the Well of the Sun for a long time. They had just recovered from shock, and finally had the mood to carefully scrutinize the palace. In fact, if they took a close look, they would discover that the beautiful and majestic palace was not really perfect, and the bedazzling, gilded palace was actually incomplete too. Despite the collapse of the Tree of Eternity that caused a massive rift to appear in Anril, the palace actually managed to stay largely intact, with only just some slight damage. That was actually a miracle. Of course, apart from Lin Li, the rest of the expedition did not know the reason for the damage. They merely felt that the damage didn't seem to make the palace any less magnificent or resplendent. In fact, it even made the entire palace give off a vicissitudinous vibe. Although they did not know about the Well of the Sun, everyone in the expedition knew from their experiences in the previous 2 worlds that the interior of the palace would definitely not be as wonderful as it looked on the outside. Besides, the more beautiful it seemed, the more likely it was that there would be great dangers. After some observation, Archbishop Martin and Donald once again turned their attention to Lin Li. The strength that Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk had shown had already given them a great shock, and caused them to involuntarily hand over the authority to lead to Lin Li. Faced with such a situation, Lin Li did not stand on ceremony. Instead, he followed the previous formation and made the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom stay in front while the Holy Light Knights guarded the flanks of the team. He issued orders to enter the palace. If it were in the past, Donald and the rest from the Rotterdam Kingdom would definitely express some displeasure about the arrangement, and then look for an opportunity to propose some conditions during the distribution of the spoils. However, now that he knew that Lin Li and the Brilliant Shrine had close ties with each other, Donald naturally dared not raise any requests. He even wanted to suck up to Lin Li. Prince Canber, who was the heir to the throne of the Rotterdam Kingdom, still did not have much respect for Lin Li, the sanctuary powerhouse. However, under Donald's persuasion, he did not express any clear dissatisfaction with the arrangement. He simply remembered it and bore a grudge against Lin Li. Forming the vanguard of the expedition according to the instructions, he deployed the alchemy colossuses with a look of displeasure. The gates of the gilded palace were slowly pushed open, and the expedition, which had the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom at the front, finally stepped into the golden palace that would make anyone feel ashamed of themselves. After stepping into the palace, the expedition discovered that the palace was not just gilded and resplendent on the surface. In fact, even the interior was filled with golden streams of light. The materials used to build the palace were all different, but shared a common characteristic, the dazzling golden light. If one were to use gold as the only material for the construction of their home, they would only seem like a wealthy upstart. However, this golden palace did not make them feel overwhelmed by a tacky and distasteful extravagance. Instead, it was solemn, noble, sacred, and not to be violated. Sensing the grand and majestic vibes around them, the members of the expedition even wondered if the enemy they might encounter this time would be some kind of clergy with divine power. However, soon after entering the palace, the enemies that swarmed towards them, in groups suddenly made them feel so miserable that they felt nauseous. It was a group of hideous-looking abyssal demons that symbolized sin and filth. It was a group of skinning walkers that resembled werewolves standing upright. Their eyes were filled with a sanguine glow, and black saliva was continuously flowing out of their fangs before dripping onto the ground messily. They had strong bodies, and their claws were half a meter long, resembling bent daggers. They looked absolutely hair-raising. The most disgusting thing was that the skinning walkers seemed to be wearing the coarsest type of armor, as they were covered in hides that obviously belonged to other demons. One would be able to smell the stench of rot coming from them, from far away. It was said that the skinning walkers' favorite pastime was to skin their enemies alive for their own collection. Although no humans had appeared here for many years, there were apparently many other demons that had been put through that treatment. The moment they saw the skinning walkers, the members of the expedition felt like they had seen a filthy, hideous, and repulsive man suddenly lying down on an incomparably holy and noble goddess. The stark contrast and dissonance were so jarring that it almost sent them into a frenzy. The alchemy colossuses in front began employing their most powerful attacks without instructions. However, the skinning walkers were not only famous for their cruel and perverted actions. More importantly, they were probably the only abyssal demons in the endless abyss that could contend with vampires in terms of speed. With their lightning-like speed, they managed to deter the higher-level abyssal demons, which did not dare to provoke them. The alchemy colossuses at the front of the expedition activated the alchemy arrays on their bodies in unison, causing powerful magic spells to instantly cover the area from which the skinning walkers were swarming towards them. However, the moment the magic spells landed, they could see figures that dodged to the side at the speed of lightning. This wave of attacks seemed rather aggressive, but in reality, they only caused a pathetic amount of damage. After the light of the magic spells faded, they saw that only a few skinning walkers were left in the area that had been covered by the magic. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom could not be blamed for being too weak. After all, they were not meant to be fast. Although they seemed to be much faster than ordinary mages, based on their casting of the alchemy array, they were far from being comparable to those who could launch instantaneous attacks, based on the activation of the alchemy arrays, and the casting of the magic spells. The skinning walkers were enraged, and let out wails and roars as they charged towards the expedition like bolts of lightning. The Holy Light Knights, that were in charge of guarding the flanks of the expedition, also moved forward under Jeremiah's command. If it were the Holy Light Knights of the past, they would probably only win by a close margin. Even if they could win, they would definitely also have to pay a great price for it. However, now that they had been baptized by Holy Light Knights, almost all of the Holy Light Knights had advanced to level 19, and their combat power had almost doubled compared to when they had just set foot in the Sky Castle. The loud battle song resounded and echoed through the space, and the holy light caused all of the golden light in the palace to dart away, forming a dense white band of light around the expedition. The skinning walkers that charged towards them like lightning immediately slowed down greatly after they reached the white light, as if they were stuck in a swamp. They couldn't help but reveal their ugly appearances. Immediately afterwards, the Holy Light Knights waved their cross spears and began killing the skinning walkers mercilessly. The skinning walkers who had lost their speed almost had their power reduced by half. The addition of the strong purification of holy light caused their physique to weaken drastically. The skinning walkers that fell into the range of the holy light battle song could barely make an effective counter against the attacks of the Holy Light Knights. All that was left was their miserable shrieks of indignation and fury. The appearance of the skinning walkers did not stop the expedition, and at the same time that the Holy Light Knights were killing them, they still maintained the same advancing speed. Seeing this, the members of the expedition felt a sense of relief, as it seemed that the world was not as difficult to deal with as the previous two worlds. However, at this time, Lin Li did not seem too relaxed. Instead, he even frowned slightly. The appearance of the skinning walkers made him even more certain that this place was related to the Well of the Sun in the Endless World. With the knowledge of the Endless World that he had in his memories, Lin Li knew that the skinning walkers were actually just the beginning, and if the Well of the Sun had been that simple, he probably would not have been able to get the Stars of Fury back then in the Endless World. Seeing that the skinning walkers could not pose a threat to the expedition at all, Donald was inevitably a little tempted by the treasures that might exist in this palace. Hence, he walked towards Lin Li and softly asked, "Master Flick, should we search this entire palace? In the past, Donald used to only address Lin Li as President Felix. Although it was not considered impolite, he was somewhat disdainful of Lin Li's position. After all, he was the chief imperial mage of the Rotterdam Kingdom, while Lin Li was just the president of a nameless, minor force. Anyone would be able to see the massive difference in status. However, Donald no longer dared to think that way now. Lin Li was a sanctuary powerhouse, who was both above all worldly power and close to the brilliant shrine. He would be able to get rid of Donald and his team easily. If he were to get up to some scheming tricks again, it would be no different from seeking death. While Donald was talking to Lin Li about that matter, Archbishop Martin walked towards them, with the same thoughts in mind. After all, their purpose of going to that place was to search for the immortal king's treasure. Now that they were facing such a resplendent and beautiful palace, they would naturally think that there had to be a precious collection of treasures inside to match it. However, Lin Li did not explain anything. He simply calmly said, "Continue advancing." Hearing such a reply from Lin Li, Donald couldn't help but sulk, but after thinking about his qualms, he had no choice but to hang his head low. To him, whether or not he could gain something was no longer the most important thing. The most important thing was whether he could leave this place safely with his team. Given the relationship between the Brilliant Shrine and the Tower of Dusk, Archbishop Martin of course did not have as many worries as Donald, but he understood that Lin Li definitely had his reasons to say that. Hence, he did not ask any questions. Lin Li definitely had his reasons to stop them from exploring the palace. However, it was not because he did not want to share the treasures with them, but because he knew that there was actually nothing valuable here anymore. In the beginning, when Lin Li had explored the Well of the Sun in the Endless World, he had actually had the same thoughts as Donald and the others, thinking that there would definitely be a massive amount of wealth in such a magnificent and majestic palace. However, after spending a long period of time searching, Lin Li had no choice but to conclude that it was only gilded on the outside and empty on the inside. Although there were all sorts of dangerous magic traps and mechanisms in the Well of the Sun, many of which were at the master level, logically speaking, ordinary abyssal demons would have no means to break them. However, after exploring, Lin Li discovered that the magic traps and magic gears there had long become ineffective, not because someone had cracked them, but because they had lost their mana source and could no longer be activated. That was also something that confused Lin Li at that time. The Well of the Sun was originally the palace of the High Elves, and the mana sources for the magic gears and magic traps were at least legendary magical crystals, whose greatest feature was that they could constantly and automatically replenish their own mana. The effects were similar to the mediation of mages. Although they were not really inexhaustible, they were more than enough to last thousands of years. Lin Li had only found out the real reason for the breakdown of the mana sources later, when he had broken into the depths of the Well of the Sun. Now that Lin Li had seen the Skinning Walkers, he knew that it was extremely similar to the Endless World's Well of the Sun. Hence, there was no need to waste precious time once again. The abyssal demons were intelligent as well, and they were not at all inferior to humans, as they knew to collect good items. Without the protection of magic gears and magic traps, how could the abyssal demons be deterred? After numerous years, the abyssal demons had already scavenged the Well of the Sun, and all of the magical gemstones that were embedded in the murals had been dug up. However, that was too complicated to explain, and Lin Li couldn't say that he had explored the Well of the Sun once in another world, which allowed him to know that there were no longer any treasures there. Fortunately, both Archbishop Martin and Donald did not dare to raise any objections to his proposal. Hence, he did not have to waste his breath on it. The expedition continued to delve deeper into the Well of the Sun while resisting the attacks of the Skinning Walkers. However, a new abyssal demon soon joined the battle. It was a type of charming demon that did not look like what they were called. In fact, they were hideous, with swollen bodies and countless tentacles that only looked disgusting. The reason they were called charming demons was because their bodies were emitting a psychedelic vibe at every moment. At the same time, they also secreted sticky substances that had strong aphrodisiac effects. In the beginning, there were people who collected the mucus from these demons and used it to prepare a strong aphrodisiac in the Endless World. Of course, the aphrodisiac was not meant for malicious actions. In the world of the game, obscene things were prohibited. Instead, it was meant for cultivating precious magical beasts as pets. However, Anral was not the world in the game. There would at most be some abnormal states, but in this world, the aphrodisiac of the charming demons was highly potent. Hence, Lin Li did not take the appearance of those charming demons lightly. He immediately commanded the mages to attack the disgusting charming demons, while also taking out his debris of the stars. Holy light, that was far purer than the divine power of the Brilliant Shrine's team. It immediately shrouded the entire team. When Lin Li had explored the Well of the Sun back then, he simply relied on his own strength, and his profession was hunter. Although his attacking power had not been weak, he still had a hard time dealing with the charming demons. However, things were different now. The pathetic defense of the charming demons was as good as useless under the bombardment of offensive spells launched by the mages of the Tower of Dusk's team. 1. It probably means they'd been so fast they'd become blurred either.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.